3 years ago, I thought my life was stable. Not perfect, but solid in the way you believe adulthood is supposed to be. I had spent 19 years at the same advertising firm, climbing from junior copywriter to senior creative director. I had survived impossible deadlines, brutal pitches, and weekends sacrificed to campaigns no one would remember a year later. But I believed in loyalty, in consistency, in earning your place. I owned a house. I had a husband. His name was Derek, and for 17 years, I believed our marriage was unbreakable. Not because it was passionate or dramatic, but because it was predictable, comfortable, safe. Every anniversary, we went back to the same Italian restaurant where he had proposed to me. Same table, same bottle of wine, same stories we told ourselves about how lucky we were to have made it. Then one Monday morning, my company downsized. After 19 years of dedication, they handed me a severance package and escorted me out like a stranger. I was stunned, but not afraid. I told myself Derek and I would figure it out together. We always had. That night, I came home and told him everything. He smiled, said all the right words about fresh starts and new opportunities, but something in his eyes felt distant. Cold, like he was already somewhere else. 4 days later, not 4 weeks, he served me with divorce papers. That was the moment my life split cleanly in two. What followed was not a divorce. It was a massacre. His lawyer, Marcus Chen, a man with teeth too white and a reputation for destroying women in court, picked through my life like a vulture. The house I bought with inheritance money from my grandmother, awarded to Derek. The savings I'd built over 20 years, drained for my emotional damage. Even the espresso machine I'd saved months to buy, gone. I walked out of that courthouse with the clothes I was wearing, my grandfather's pocket watch, and $247 in my bank account. That night, Derek called me, not to apologize, not to explain. He laughed. "You'll die alone and broke," he said. "That's what happens to women who bore me." Then he said a name that made my blood run cold. Lisa, my former business partner. The woman who had voted to eliminate my position. The woman who had been sleeping with my husband. And standing in the ruins of my life, I still didn't know the truth. I didn't know that losing everything was the first step toward gaining something far more dangerous. Power. My name is James Davis, and that's the first uncomfortable truth I had to learn to sit with after everything happened. My name sounded masculine on paper, and growing up, people always paused before saying it, like they expected someone else to stand up. My grandfather named me after himself. "A strong name," he used to say, tapping my forehead with one knuckle. "A name that won't get pushed around." I spent most of my life proving him right in the only way I knew how: work. I was in my early 40s then, sharp-edged from years of deadlines and client politics, but still soft in the places that mattered. Advertising had been my first love, the craft of language, the psychology behind a good story, the way a single phrase could shift how people saw themselves. I started at the firm at 23 as a junior copywriter with cheap heels and big ambition. 19 years later, I had a glass office, a title that sounded impressive at dinner parties, and a calendar so full it could suffocate you if you stared at it too long. I was good at my job. Not flashy, not loud, but consistent, reliable. The kind of creative director who didn't show up with ego, just results. That same quiet competence was the reason I fell for Derek Thompson. We met at a client event, one of those polished, catered networking nights where everyone pretends they aren't calculating your value while shaking your hand. Derek was charming in a way that felt effortless. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he had that dangerous talent of making you feel like you were the only person there. When he listened, his eyes didn't wander. When he laughed, it sounded like approval. When he complimented my work, he didn't do it like a flirt. He did it like a man who respected what I had built. I wasn't naive. I had dated men who wanted a woman they could improve, men who got uncomfortable when I paid the bill, Men who made jokes about career women, like they weren't one missed promotion away from resenting me. Derek wasn't like that, at least not in the beginning. He proposed to me at that little Italian restaurant on a rainy Thursday night. There wasn't a crowd, no violin, just soft light, warm bread, and his hands shaking slightly when he opened the box. The ring wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful. Clean lines, classic cut, something he said reminded him of me. Simple, strong, impossible to fake. 17 years is a long time to build a life with someone. We didn't have children. People always assumed we would, especially his family. There were holidays where his mother would slide baby photos across the table like subtle pressure, and Derek would squeeze my hand under the cloth and tell me later, "Ignore her, it's our life." For a while, I believed him. Our marriage wasn't cinematic. It was routine. We worked. We ate dinner together most nights. We watched the same shows. We argued about stupid things, laundry, forgotten grocery lists, the thermostat. We made up quickly. We moved through adulthood like two people rowing the same boat in calm water. And because the house was my anchor, I bought it with inheritance money from my grandmother, her final gift after a lifetime of quiet saving. She used to tell me, "A home is insurance against the world." When she died, I poured that money into something permanent. Derek loved the house, loved the yard, loved the way neighbors waved at him like he belonged there. Over time, he started calling it our house. I didn't correct him. I thought marriage made everything shared. Every anniversary, we returned to the restaurant where he proposed. Same table, same wine. Derek would smile across the candlelight, and I would feel proud, not just of us, but of how far I'd come from the young woman with cheap heels and a hunger to matter. If you had asked me then whether my husband could betray me, I would have said no. Not because Derek was perfect, but because I believed 17 years created loyalty by default. I didn't understand that some people don't stay because they love you. Some people stay because you're useful. And I didn't understand that the first crack in my life didn't begin at home. It began at work. It began with the way my company changed, slowly, without me noticing. The firm had been bought and restructured years earlier. Leadership shifted. New executives came in with glossy smiles and phrases like streamlining and efficiency. People who had been there forever started disappearing. Quiet resignations, sudden early retirement, layoffs explained as market adjustments. I kept my head down and worked harder. That was my instinct. If you prove your value, they can't touch you. And for a long time, that seemed true, until the day it wasn't. And the strangest part, the part that makes my stomach twist even now, is that when the firm finally decided to eliminate my position, it didn't feel like a business decision. It felt personal, like someone had been waiting for the moment I was weakest, like someone had already mapped out what would happen next. And at the center of that map, whether I wanted to see it or not, was Derek. Because when I walked through my front door that evening with that severance packet in my bag, the marriage I thought was stable didn't just look different. It looked prepared. As if Derek had already rehearsed his role, as if the smile he gave me was not shock, but timing. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. They just didn't announce themselves as danger. They arrived dressed as inconvenience, distraction, small shifts that were easy to excuse when you had already invested 17 years into believing someone was on your side. After I lost my job, Derek changed, but not in the dramatic way people expect betrayal to look like. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse, he didn't pull away physically. He became efficient, too efficient. The first thing he did was suggest we reorganize our finances. "Just until things stabilize," he said casually, leaning against the kitchen counter like he was proposing a grocery list, not dismantling my independence. "It'll be easier if everything's streamlined." I didn't fight him. I was tired, still processing the shock of being cut loose after 19 years. I told myself this was what partnership looked like in hard times. one person stepping up when the other stumbled. He started making calls in the other room, lowering his voice, ending conversations the moment I walked in. When I asked who he was talking to, he always had an answer ready. Work stuff. Legal advice. Just Marcus. Marcus Chen. I knew the name before the divorce. Everyone in the city did. The kind of lawyer men warned each other about in hushed tones. Derek mentioned him like a precaution, not a threat. Just in case things get messy with the company, he said once, not looking up from his phone. At the time, I thought he meant my company. I didn't realize he meant me. At work, or what was left of my professional life, things unraveled just as quietly. Former colleagues stopped calling. Projects I had led were suddenly being credited to someone else. When I reached out to clarify, emails went unanswered or came back stiff and formal, like messages from strangers. One afternoon, I ran into Lisa Harper at a networking lunch. Lisa had been my business partner for years. We built campaigns together, survived brutal client pitches, celebrated awards side by side. She was sharp, ambitious, and, if I'm being honest, always a little too interested in my personal life. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her hand lingering on my arm a fraction too long. "I'm managing," I said, still figuring things out. She smiled, but there was something strange in it. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief. "Well," she said lightly, "sometimes doors close so better ones can open." At the time, I thought she was being supportive. Later, I would understand she already knew which doors were opening and who they were opening for. Derek started coming home later, said he was meeting contacts, exploring opportunities, helping clean up the firm's transition. He talked like he was suddenly indispensable, like losing my job had somehow created space for him to rise. His family noticed the change before I did. His mother started calling more often, not to check on me, but to ask pointed questions about our finances, about whether I was actively looking, about how long I expected Derek to carry the household. "You know men feel pressure," she said once, her voice coated in false concern. "They need to feel respected." At dinner with his sister Beth, the atmosphere felt wrong in a different way. Beth was quieter than usual. She avoided eye contact, drank more wine. When Derek stepped outside to take a call, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Are you okay?" "I will be," I said. "Why?" She opened her mouth, closed it again, then shook her head. "Nothing. I'm just worried about you." I should have pushed. I didn't. Because part of me still believed the story I had told myself for years, that loyalty earned protection, that shared history meant safety, that people who sat at your table for 17 years wouldn't sharpen knives behind your back. The house started to feel smaller, colder, like something was being emptied out of it, piece by piece, before I even knew it was for sale. I began waking up at night with my heart racing, my mind replaying conversations that suddenly sounded different in hindsight. Derek's reassurances, his smiles, the way he never once asked how I was feeling, only how fast I could bounce back. And beneath it all, there was a growing sense that decisions were being made without me, about my career, about my marriage, about my future. I didn't know yet that the firing, the divorce, the financial devastation, they weren't separate disasters. They were connected. They were coordinated. And the moment I finally understood that truth would come fast, violently, in a way that would strip me down to nothing and force me to find out who I really was when there was nothing left to lose. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday afternoon, not by certified mail, not with a warning, not even from Derek himself. A man I had never seen before knocked on the door of the house I believed was still my home and asked for my name like he was confirming a delivery address. "James Davis?" "Yes." "You've been served." The folder felt heavier than paper when I took it from his hand. Thick, over-prepared, as if someone had been planning this moment for a long time. I closed the door slowly and stood in the entryway, staring at my own name printed at the top of a document that treated 17 years of marriage like a failed contract. 4 days. That was all it took between losing my job and losing my husband. When Derek came home that night, he didn't pretend this was sudden. "I figured this would be easier if we didn't drag things out," he said, loosening his tie, his voice calm, almost bored. "We're just not compatible anymore." Not compatible. Like we were a bad software update. "You waited 4 days," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded hollow. 4 days after I lost my job. He shrugged. "That's not fair. You're making this about timing." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised both of us. "You hired Marcus Chen before I was fired, didn't you?" His eyes flickered. Just for a second. That was the moment I knew. The divorce proceedings were brutal by design. Marcus Chen moved through my finances like a surgeon, removing anything that could keep me alive. Every account, every asset, every dollar I had ever saved. He framed everything as compensation for Derek's emotional labor and sacrificed opportunities. In court, Derek sat behind him, composed, almost smug. A man watching a plan unfold exactly as intended. The house, bought with inheritance money from my grandmother, was awarded to him. My savings account, 20 years of discipline, was drained for his suffering. Even the car, the furniture, the espresso machine I had saved months to buy, all of it was stripped away, piece by piece. When Marcus argued that Derek had sacrificed his career to support mine, I almost laughed out loud. Derek had worked sporadically, quit jobs easily, complained endlessly. The longest position he ever held was 3 years, and even that ended because he was bored. But truth doesn't always matter in court. Performance does. The judge barely looked at me when she ruled 70% to Derek. I walked out of that courthouse with the clothes I was wearing, my grandfather's pocket watch, and $247 in my checking account. That night, Derek called. For one reckless moment, I thought he might feel something. Regret, shame, guilt. I was wrong. "You'll die alone and broke," he said, laughing softly. "That's what happens to women who bore me." Then he said it, casually, cruelly. "Lisa says I should have left you years ago." The name hit me like a blow to the chest. Lisa Harper, my former business partner. The woman who had voted to eliminate my position. The woman who had stood in my kitchen, eaten my food, smiled at me like a friend. "They've been sleeping together," Derek continued, almost conversational. "You were too busy being adequate to notice." I hung up without saying a word. What could I say? They had already taken everything I thought mattered, or so I believed. A week later, I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and exhaustion, staring at my bank balance, calculating how long $247 could keep me alive. That was when I saw the advertisement. Plasma donors needed, $40 first donation. And I didn't know it yet, but the moment I walked into that donation center, broke, humiliated, stripped of my identity, I stepped into the beginning of something that would change everything. The first thing poverty does is distort your sense of dignity. It doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, whispering compromises you never imagined making. Things you once dismissed as not for people like me suddenly become calculations instead of judgments. $40. That was what my life was worth that morning. I stared at the plasma donation advertisement for a long time before folding the paper and slipping it into my bag like a secret. I told myself it was temporary, just a bridge, just until something, anything, shifted. The donation center sat between a pawn shop and a check cashing place in the roughest part of town. The kind of street where desperation had a smell, industrial cleaner, old sweat, fear. Inside, the waiting room was quiet, in the way people get when they're conserving energy. A teenage mother bounced a crying baby on her knee. An elderly man struggled to read the intake form with shaking hands. A woman around my age stared at the wall like she had already left her body. I took a seat in a plastic chair with one uneven leg and felt something inside me fracture. This was not how my life was supposed to look. The receptionist, her name tag read Clara, had kind eyes. the kind that had seen too many people come through these doors with their pride folded into their pockets. "First time?" she asked gently. "That obvious?" I tried to smile. "You're wearing a blazer," she said, sliding a clipboard toward me. "Most people don't bother." I filled out the forms with hands that felt disconnected from my body. Name, age, medical history, employment status, unemployed, the word burned. A nurse named Sarah called me back. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with a brightness that felt practiced. She took my blood pressure, temperature, asked routine questions. Then she drew 3 vials of blood. "I'll take these to the lab," she said. 5 minutes. 5 minutes turned into 15, then 20, then 30. I watched other donors finish, collect their cash, and leave. I sat there alone, staring at the floor, wondering if something was wrong with me, if even my blood wasn't good enough anymore. Through the glass, I saw Sarah on the phone, her posture stiff, her voice low and urgent. 2 other staff members crowded around her computer screen, looking at something, then at me, then back again. When she returned, all the color had drained from her face. "Miss Davis," she said carefully, gripping my file like it might fall apart. "I need you to stay right here. Please don't move." My heart slammed against my ribs. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing's wrong," she said too quickly. "We just need you to wait." She disappeared again. My mind spiraled. Cancer. HIV. Some silent disease swimming in my blood, waiting to finish what Derek and Lisa had started. When 3 men in expensive suits burst through the doors half an hour later, I almost laughed from the shock of it. They didn't belong there. The man in front, silver hair, tailored charcoal suit, locked eyes with me instantly. His expression shifted through disbelief, shock, and something that looked like relief. 32 years, he whispered. "We finally found you." I was escorted into a back office that looked absurdly luxurious compared to the waiting room. Dark wood, leather chairs, silence that felt expensive. The man introduced himself as Robert Sterling, CEO of Sterling Biotech. What he told me next shattered what little certainty I had left. I didn't have cancer. I didn't have a disease. I had something else. Something rare, something worth millions. And as he spoke about genetic mutations, dying children, antibodies my body produced naturally, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. That morning, I had walked in calculating whether I could afford groceries. By the time he slid a contract across the desk, $17 million, my entire understanding of fairness, loss, and survival had collapsed. I asked for 24 hours, not because I needed to decide, but because my life had already been turned upside down once that week, and I needed a moment to breathe before it happened again. When I walked back into the daylight with a $40 check in my hand, I didn't feel victorious. I felt terrified. Because I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Derek and Lisa thought they had destroyed me, and they had no idea what was coming next. I signed the contract at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning. Robert Sterling's office sat high above the city in a glass tower that reflected sunlight like it had nothing to hide. The contrast between that place and the studio apartment I'd slept in the night before was almost obscene. 12 hours earlier, I had fallen asleep to the sound of a neighbor's television bleeding through the wall. Now I was sitting across from 2 corporate lawyers as 7 figures moved into my account with quiet digital efficiency. $6 million. Cleared. Immediate. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, breathing carefully, afraid that if I let myself feel anything too strongly, the whole thing would vanish. Before I left, I made one request. "I want absolute confidentiality," I said. "No press, no announcements. As far as the world is concerned, I'm still broke." Robert studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "May I ask why?" I smiled for the first time in months. "Let's call it a social experiment." The first person I told was Paul Norton. Paul had been my friend for over a decade, the kind who didn't disappear when things got ugly. We met at his apartment that evening, a modest place shaped by his own divorce years earlier. When I told him everything, the plasma donation, the mutation, the money, he just stared at me like I'd confessed to time travel. "You're serious," he said finally. I showed him my bank balance. Paul swore softly under his breath. Then he told me something that made the room feel colder. "I ran into Beth Palmer at the grocery store," he said. "Derek's sister. She got drunk, started talking." What followed rewrote my understanding of the last year of my life. Derek and Lisa had been planning my removal for over 12 months. The downsizing, the vote, the timing. Derek wanted my position. Lisa wanted my shares. They engineered my firing so Derek could step in cleanly. He'd already been promoted. They were selling the firm to Whitmore Media for $18 million. Lisa would receive half. My hands shook as I set my glass down. "She destroyed my life for $9 million, I said quietly. "There's more," Paul added. "She dragged out the divorce on purpose, to drain your legal funds. She called it breaking you." The sun was setting when I pulled Robert Sterling's business card from my bag. $17 million. 923 dying children. A woman who had laughed while dismantling me. That was the moment something inside me hardened. Not into rage, but into focus. I didn't want revenge. I wanted balance. Over the next few hours, Paul and I built a plan. Publicly, I would remain exactly what Derek and Lisa believed me to be. Broke, defeated, irrelevant. I would stay in my studio apartment. I would look desperate. Privately, I created Norwood Ventures, a shell corporation managed by an attorney who didn't ask questions as long as the retainer cleared. Through Norwood, I started buying Derek's debts. He had a gambling problem. A bad one. Poker nights at the Riverside Casino, underground games on Fridays. $63,000 in markers he thought were invisible. I bought them at a discount, legally. Suddenly, I owned his desperation. Next, I hired a private investigator, Martin Bishop, former detective, gravel voice, relentless. "Document everything," I told him. "Every meeting, every purchase, every mistake." 2 weeks later, he slid a folder across the table. "They're celebrating," he said, "like they've already won." Photos showed Derek and Lisa at the country club. Champagne, oysters, jewelry worth more than my old car. Money they didn't have yet. Futures they thought were guaranteed. Then Martin added almost casually, "Lisa's sister Beth is drowning in debt. She's bitter, and she's not loyal." That night, I knocked on Beth's door. I didn't threaten her. I offered her a choice. $10,000 up front, $5,000 a month. All she had to do was listen. Remember. Report. When she hesitated, I told her the truth. Lisa laughed when she destroyed me, I said. "I'm just making sure the truth has a voice." Beth called me that night. She agreed. And with that, the trap began to close. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with patience, precision, and the kind of inevitability you only notice when it's already too late. Power doesn't erase pain. That was the lie I almost believed. On paper, my life had changed overnight. I had money, more than I ever imagined. Access, protection, a future that no longer depended on Derek's goodwill or a judge's mood. But none of that touched the part of me that still woke up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, replaying 17 years like a crime scene. I was living a double life. By day, I went to Sterling Biotech for medical testing that felt endless. Scans, blood draws, consultations. Dr. Virginia Murphy spoke to me about proteins and trials and survival rates with the reverence of someone handling a miracle. She told me children were already improving, that my plasma was saving lives. By night, I returned to my studio apartment. The same mildew smell, the same flickering hallway light. I left my expensive watch in a drawer and wore worn-out coats on purpose. I let the world keep believing I had lost. And in that quiet, the loneliness crept in. Beth's reports came regularly. Derek panicking over money. Lisa screaming about houses she couldn't buy fast enough. Their greed was grotesque, but knowing the truth didn't heal the wound. It only clarified it. Some nights, I sat on the edge of my bed and wondered if I had imagined my marriage. If I had misread every smile, every promise, every shared plan. 17 years doesn't vanish easily. It leaves echoes. The lowest moment came unexpectedly. I was at Sterling Biotech watching footage from a trial patient, a 7-month-old baby finally lifting her head on her own, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered without thinking. It was Derek. His voice was different, tighter, fractured. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "I heard you're not doing well." The audacity stole my breath. "I'm fine," I said. He exhaled, like he'd been waiting for that. "Look, things got complicated. Lisa's stressed. The deal's not closing as fast as we hoped. I thought maybe we could talk. You always understood me." Understood. The word cracked something open inside my chest. For a split second, the old instincts flared. The woman who smoothed things over, who absorbed damage quietly, who believed kindness could fix anything. Then I remembered the laugh, the words, "You'll die alone and broke." I hung up without replying. That night, alone in my apartment, the weight finally hit me. I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the kind of tears that leak out when you're too tired to hold yourself together anymore. Tears for the career I loved, the marriage I believed in, the woman I had been before all of this. I realized then that no amount of strategy could protect me from grief. This wasn't about revenge anymore, or justice, or money. It was about standing at the edge of who I used to be and deciding whether I would let betrayal define me or transform me. And in that stillness, surrounded by loss and possibility, I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive this. I would finish it calmly, completely, on my terms. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic revelation. It arrived quietly, through evidence. Paul came over one evening with a laptop and a look on his face I recognized immediately. It was the expression he used when numbers stopped being abstract and started telling a story. "I pulled more records," he said, setting the computer between us. "Derek didn't just take credit for your work. He rewrote history. He opened file after file, campaign decks, internal emails, award submissions. Projects I had led were now attributed to Derek. My name removed, his inserted. Timelines altered, client testimonials edited. This is systematic," Paul said. "Months of it, maybe longer." Then Martin delivered the final piece. A tech specialist he worked with had accessed archived server backups, untouched by Derek's revisions. Original files, metadata, timestamps, proof. Not suspicion, not interpretation. Proof. At the same time, Beth called with a trembling voice. "They're scared," she whispered. "Lisa keeps asking who could be doing this. Derek's barely sleeping. He's snapping at everyone. He thinks someone's watching him." I closed my eyes and felt something settle inside me. This wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. I authorized Paul to prepare an anonymous disclosure to Whitmore Media's due diligence team. Nothing flashy, nothing personal, just facts, files. A map showing exactly where the fraud lived and how deep it ran. No names, no accusations, just truth. 3 days later, Whitmore's auditors arrived at the firm. The panic was immediate. Emergency meetings, closed doors, raised voices. Derek called Beth in a spiral, convinced his life was collapsing because of bad luck and timing. He still didn't see it. The second move was surgical. Norwood Ventures filed formal notice demanding repayment of Derek's gambling debt, $63,000 plus interest. The summons was served at his office in front of his staff. Public. Embarrassing. Legal. Then came the final realization, the one that shifted everything for me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. For years, my life had been shaped by other people's decisions. Executives, judges, a husband who mistook usefulness for love. Now, every move was mine, measured, intentional. I looked at my reflection in the dark window that night and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she was cruel, But because she was finished apologizing, I sent one last instruction to Paul: proceed. And as the dominoes began to fall, slowly, inevitably, I understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Losing everything had stripped me down to my core, and what remained was not weakness. It was power, quiet, patient, and impossible to ignore. The collapse didn't come all at once. It unraveled the way lies always do, thread by thread, until there was nothing left holding them together. Whitmore Media suspended the acquisition first. No press release, no explanation, just a quiet statement about irregularities discovered during due diligence. Inside the firm, panic spread like a contagion. Meetings were called, canceled, rescheduled. People stopped making eye contact in the hallways. Derek's name, once spoken with admiration, started carrying a different weight. Then the lawsuit hit. Norwood Ventures versus Derek Thompson. $63,000 in gambling debt, plus interest, plus legal fees. The summons was served at his office, in front of his team. Phones came out. Someone whispered. Someone laughed nervously. Derek's face drained of color. That afternoon, Lisa called Beth in a drunken spiral. "Someone is targeting us," she kept repeating. "Everything's going wrong at the same time. The deal, the lawsuit, the house. It's like the universe turned on us." Beth told me later that Lisa sounded genuinely afraid for the first time. I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance, as if I were watching a storm from the safety of high ground, not because I had caused it, but because I had finally stepped out of its path. The Whitmore deal collapsed completely a week later. Their attorneys issued a formal withdrawal, citing documented fraud, falsified records, and serious ethical violations. $18 million vanished overnight. The firm's valuation plummeted. Derek's promotion to CEO became a liability instead of a victory. He tried to fix it. That was his final mistake. Cornered and desperate, Derek moved $50,000 from the firm's reserve account, disguising it as a vendor payment. Sloppy, rushed, traceable. Paul flagged it immediately. The evidence went straight to the board. The vote to terminate Derek was unanimous. Criminal charges followed within 48 hours. Wire fraud, embezzlement. And because Lisa's name appeared on several financial transfers, accounts she thought were invisible, the district attorney opened an investigation into her role as a co-conspirator. That part wasn't planned, but I didn't intervene. Beth called me a few days later, her voice quiet. "Lisa wants to see you," she said. "She says she needs to talk. She sounds broken." We met at the same coffee shop where Derek and I had our first date 20 years earlier. Lisa looked smaller somehow. Her expensive clothes hung wrong on her frame. The confidence she used to wear like armor had evaporated. "I know I don't deserve your time," she said, "but I need help." "You need money," I corrected gently. She nodded. "I made mistakes. I was cruel. I didn't think it would go this far." I stood up. "You laughed," I said calmly. "You told me I'd die alone and broke. You spent over a year planning how to erase me." Tears ruined her mascara. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't rebuild what you destroyed." When I walked away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. 3 months later, Derek was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. Lisa received 6. The world kept turning, and for the first time in a long while, it turned without dragging me behind it. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood in the living room of my new house and realized something quietly profound. It wasn't a mansion. There were no marble floors or gates or symbols of excess. It was simply mine, a comfortable place in a good neighborhood. Sunlight through clean windows. A small yard big enough for the dog I had always wanted but never allowed myself to have because something else always came first. Work, compromise, marriage, survival. Paul was there, arguing with me about where the couch should go. "It's too far from the TV," he insisted. "It's exactly where it belongs," I said, smiling. "You just hate change." He laughed, And for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel fragile. At Sterling Biotech, life moved at a different rhythm. The FDA approved the treatment derived from my plasma. The rollout was faster than anyone had hoped. Children who had been deteriorating for years were stabilizing, improving, walking, running. I watched through the observation window as a 7-year-old girl took her first unaided steps, her parents collapsing into each other with sobs that felt almost holy. Dr. Murphy stood beside me, her voice soft. We're seeing improvements in over 80% of patients. Nervous system regeneration we once thought was impossible. How long until everyone gets access? I asked. 6 months, she said. No one left behind. I established the Sterling Davis Foundation soon after, full funding for families who couldn't afford treatment. No applications designed to humiliate. No parents turned away. Money came in quietly. Royalties, licensing, board appointments I never sought but accepted because I understood something now. Power is only dangerous when it's unconscious. Robert Sterling offered me a permanent leadership role. You know how to build things, he said. You know patience, precision, long games. We need that. I accepted. Not because I wanted status, but because I finally trusted myself. Beth graduated business school the following spring. She paid off her debts, built something of her own. When she thanked me, I told her the truth. You chose to survive. That was the hard part. As for Derek and Lisa, I didn't follow their appeals. I didn't track their days. I didn't need to. Justice had already arrived. One evening, Robert brought over a bottle of wine. We sat in my backyard as the sky turned orange and then deep blue. 53 children, he said softly. That's how many lives your plasma has saved so far. I thought about the day I walked into that donation center with $40 worth of hope and nothing else. I thought about the woman Derek called adequate, mediocre, boring. Maybe I was. But ordinary people, when pushed far enough, when stripped of illusions and given the chance to choose differently, are capable of extraordinary things. I didn't win because I was ruthless. I won because I stayed aware, because I refused to disappear quietly, because I understood that losing everything is sometimes the only way to see what actually matters. That night, alone in my house, I lay in a bed I chose, in a future I built, surrounded by people who valued me not for my usefulness, but for my presence. Derek was wrong. I didn't die alone and broke. I was reborn, clear, grounded, and finally free. And that is the lesson I leave you with. Being underestimated is not a weakness. It's an opportunity, if you survive long enough to use it.